Today's birthday buddy is Ronald Griffin. Ronald is 6 years old and lives in Detroit, Michigan. Happy birthday, Ronald.
Local broadcast of this program is made possible by Lionel Trains Incorporated. For over 90 years, bringing the fun and excitement of model railroading to young and old alike. Lionel, because no childhood should be without a train.
Come and let me tell you a story I know, all about trains and where they go, all about trains and what they do, all about trains.
Trains are more than just a locomotive and a caboose. The cars in between are known as rolling stock. With me to help explain what rolling stock is Richard Camp.
Chuck, the easiest way to explain rolling stock is to show you. Let's take a look at the rolling stock we use here on the Soo line.
First is the basic flat car, merely a flat bed over a set of wheels or trucks. Not too interesting, but we can do a lot with a flat car. Let's take a look at this car. We've modified it slightly, putting some bracing around, and perhaps this is carrying heavy equipment. Who knows what's underneath that tarpaulin, represented by a small piece of fabric. Here's another car we modified slightly. This one is carrying boats. As usual, in moving around in the yard, the load has shifted or slid around slightly. This car needs to really be repackaged. Rail. If there were a wreck somewhere and rail were torn up, we'd ship some more rail out so that they could put it in place.
What's a maintenance of way car? Is that just for the actual...
This would be one of your maintenance of way cars. They maintain the right-of-way.
Okay.
The next car is also an example of that. We put some sideboards up, labeled it a tool car. It's still a basic flat car. Flat cars can do more than just this, though. Let's look at a slightly modified flat car. This one is known as a bulkhead flat because the two end projections are bulkheads. These are primarily used to handle pulpwood. Here's one that's empty, and the next car carries a load of pulpwood. As you see, there would be stacks of this pulpwood placed in here, and they would be put in at the logging camps and pulled out down at the paper mills. While speaking of logging camps, let's look at the next basic flat car. It's been modified a little bit. This is kind of a skeleton flat. This would handle logs. Logs would be placed on here and then strapped on with large chains. You don't see these too common, but this next type of car you see quite commonly today. This one carries a pair of trucks on it. Since they ride piggyback fashion on the flat car, it's often referred to as a piggyback car, or sometimes just referred to as a pig. A train full of these would be known as a pig train. Products can be carried not only in trucks, but might be carried in other types of containers. And that brings us to our next type of car, the gondola car, or as it's commonly referred to, the gon. Everything is kind of a shortened version.
What is a gondola? What does gondola mean?
Gondola means basket. It has sidewalls all the way around our basic flat car, and now we can carry different things in it. Here might be some containers of equipment. The next car carries some scrap, different pieces of metal that have been smashed up and bent together and dumped in here. This could carry sand, gravel, anything of this sort could fit in there. Chuck, to protect the contents of the car from the elements, you might use a car like this one. This is a covered gon. In this case, products that might be harmed by weather can be carried. When you wanted to unload a car like this, a crane would come down, lift up the entire top, take it off, and then empty the contents out. A similar type car with just a little bit higher sides is a hopper car. These are fairly common, especially in the eastern part of the country, and now in the Midwest. These predominantly carry coal. Now, hopper cars are related by the number of chutes they have beneath them. So this has 4 and would be known as a 4-bay hopper. These could be 3-bay, or as this next car, could be 2-bay. Some of these in the southern part of the United States now have been modified. The sides have been extended up a little bit further, and now they carry wood chips rather than coal. These could also carry gravel, sand, any type of general product. If you wanted to carry a little more sophisticated product, or maybe something again that would be harmed by the weather, you could go to a covered hopper. In this case, we might be carrying, say, grain or flour. These could be all sorts of things. Here's one that carries bulk feed products, animal feed. The next one carries the opposite extreme. This is a fertilizer car. Again, fertilizer and fertilizer products would be carried in a car like this so they wouldn't be exposed to the weather. Likewise, you might take a car like this and load it up with grain, flour, or other grain products. Sort of things you wouldn't want to really have exposed to the weather elements.
How do I know which one of these particular cars would be the right one for me? Is there some book or something that I can use to look it up, or do I just keep an eye of the industry that I'm going to model, or what?
Well, basically, I think you use the real world as your reference book. If you're going to model, say, a grain mill, go look and see what type of cars are there. If you're going to model a power plant, go look and see what kind of cars are there. Look at what the real railroads are using and try to use similar type cars. Now, this car is not confined to one product. This might carry flour or grain today. Tomorrow it might be shipped up and carry some other product. There are certain rules that the railroads have, though, that you can't carry certain products, say for human consumption, after you've carried some other products, unless you clean the car out. These cars are periodically cleaned and inspected before they're used again. Another type of container car is this car. Probably fairly familiar to you. This is a tank car. In this case, a chemical tank car. This one happens to be carrying liquid chlorine. Opposed to a chemical tank car, you might have an oil tank car. In this case, carrying oil or oil products. Notice the different type of dome structure as compared to our previous car. Now, these can come in all sorts of varieties. This happens to be a 3-dome tank car. The next car is a 2-dome tank car. The reason for the name, I think, is quite obvious. The next car is a 1-dome tank car. Now, they also come in a lot of different sizes. Notice that this is kind of the standard size. Here's a single-dome tank car. That's a little bit shorter. Now we have a single-dome tank car. That's a little bit shorter. And we even have a single-dome tank car that's just a wee bit shorter again. The other side would be a tank car like this, which is just a wee bit bigger. So tank cars come in all shapes and sizes. You can do whatever you want. This happens to be a dual tank car with central service bays.
Well, that's a military car, right, for fuel and stuff?
No, this is one we've kind of modified here on the Soo line. It's labeled a fuel car, but it's actually been moved into maintenance of way service again, and we use it as a weed sprayer car. The tanks on either end can carry different types of chemicals. The central building or little box in the center actually contains all the equipment that we need to put out and spray the weeds with. So we run this in the trains periodically to kill the weeds along the side of your railroad. Here's another type of tank car. This has the tanks mounted a little bit differently. In this case, this is a pickle car. This is a private company, the Cam Pickle Company, or Dick's Dill.
How old is that car?
Oh, this would be a car from back in the 30s. You wouldn't see a lot of these nowadays. Likewise, you wouldn't see very much of the next car, which is really the covered version of the pickle car. We just run these around on the railroad to have a little bit of fun with. You wouldn't see too many of these out today. And likewise, you don't see a whole lot of the next type of car. But this was very common in the past. This is a stock car. In this case, the stock that's being carried is cattle. This could also carry, perhaps, pigs.
Is there a big variation in the different types of design for stock cars? Are they all pretty much the same?
Well, there's quite a bit of variation. Let's take a look at this next car. This was designed to carry chickens. This is a poultry car. Again, a type of stock car. Again, let's kind of look at the time basis with our basic boxcar. And it really is just a box. The box is sitting on top of the flat car, if you will. This would be an older type boxcar. It has wooden sides and wooden ends. As we get a little more modern, we would see a boxcar that still has the wooden sides, but now has steel ends. Notice it's larger, contains more freight. Again, a little more modern would be this all-steel boxcar. In this case, both the ends and the sides are made of steel, much stronger and able to carry heavier loads. This would be kind of your standard 40-foot boxcar. Now, when you use the word standard, it's a little deceptive because this is a 40-foot boxcar, but notice the door is quite different. This is a plug door boxcar.
I also noticed that there's no walkway or anything across the top on this one.
Right. As we go along, the government and the regulating agencies that control the railroad ruled out that men would walk along on tops of the cars. So since they could no longer walk up there, the walkways have been removed, and you just don't see them anymore. That's also another sign that this is a more modern car. This plug door boxcar would be used in grain service. They would bring in a chute, load this car up with grain, and then seal it up, plugging the sides, if you will. Here's another variation on the boxcar. In this case, a 50-foot boxcar. Today, you might see 50-foot boxcars, 60, or perhaps even an 85-foot boxcar. This is a double-door boxcar and could be used to carry automobiles. Here's again your plug door version of the 50-foot boxcar. Now, recently we've had another phenomenon occur as exemplified by this car. A lot of the short lines throughout the country began to build or buy boxcars, letter them up for their railroads, and then put them out for general lease service to other railroads. They were basically rented out or leased to other railroads. So you started getting some brightly colored cars. We've done some shots over on the ALM, and we have them represented here on the Soo line as well. Another short line up in this part of the country that would carry wood products would be this car. And as you see, they're very brightly colored. If you were to carry this to an extreme, you might look out someday and see a car like this. This is a refrigerator car, or as it's commonly known, a reefer.
Now, these cars are very brightly painted, but how many railroads actually go to the trouble of doing that?
Well, in the past, these were fairly common because these were actually moving billboards. These were portable ads, if you will, for the different companies. Not only did it tell what product was being carried in there, but it carried the company name throughout the country. These were subsequently, again, outlawed from use. The federal government said you couldn't use them, so you started seeing cars like this. And this would just be for the individual company that owned it, very restrained.
What's with the open doors here on the top of this one?
Well, those little open doors are actually hatches. Now, initially, these cars were cooled by putting in big blocks of ice, putting in some salt, and making a salt-ice mixture, much like you might do at home when you made ice cream. So the cars could only be moved from place to place where there were stations that could re-ice the cars. And there were very long ramps built, or ice docks, where whole trains would pull in and be loaded with ice and then carried on to the next stop and re-iced. So this initiated the name the refrigerator car. Later, these were replaced with mechanical type devices such as your home refrigerator to keep the product cool, and you didn't have to stop and re-ice them.
Well, once refrigeration came in, then you really didn't need those cars.
Well, these were used for a short time after that. They often ran just as you see this car running, with the hatches open. And so as the train ran along, air would enter one end of the car, circulate or ventilate through the car, and exit out the other end. So they were often referred to as ventilator and refrigerator cars. Now, a little more modern version of the refrigerator car would be this one. In this case, this is an all-steel car, and the sides, again, have that plug door type configuration. Now, so far we've talked about basically revenue cars, our rolling stock, with a few non-revenue cars, such as our maintenance of way cars. But there's another type of car that can show a good deal of variation, and that's the one that comes at the end of the train. the caboose. Now this would be an older type caboose. This might carry passengers on one end and their baggage or mail or something else on the other. So this was often known as a combine. It had a combination of both freight and passenger. A more typical caboose would be the little red caboose at the end of the train, such as this one. This is an all-steel caboose with a cupola, or viewing port, up above the car itself. And finally, we have the caboose we use here on the Soo line as our real prototype. And what we've tried to establish is a definite flavor or flair for our railroad.
One of the questions that I've got now for you is we've done a lot of moving of these cars along the string, but none of them have derailed yet. So how do we keep them on the track?
Well, Chuck, the basic way to keep them on the track is to take good care of them. As with anything, maintenance is the most important factor. Let's walk over to the work area, and I'll show you some of the things I do when I first get a car and then later on to maintain it or keep it going. Chuck, I laid some things out at the workbench to kind of show you what we do with a car. This is one we've had on the railroad, and it's kind of in for routine maintenance, so I stripped it down a little bit to show you some of the techniques we use. First of all, we literally work on a car from the rails up. So we're going to take the wheel sets, or the truck, and check them first. We use our good old handy NMRA gauge, and there's a portion labeled for wheels. So we check and make sure that the wheels are the right distance apart. If they're not, we might need to reach in here and spread them a little bit, or perhaps pull them a little closer together. That's the first thing you want to make sure, is that the wheels are properly aligned or set up. If they're not, you just can't get them to work, you can always go down and just buy some wheel sets at your local hobby shop, come in and put them in. Again, gauge these before you put them in use too, though. They might not be in proper gauge.
Now, if I'm going to buy a wheel set, should I go ahead and buy metal ones or plastic ones, or does it matter?
It depends on the type of couplers you're using. In my case, I use couplers that work with magnets, so if I use steel wheels, they're going to be attracted to the magnets as well. So I use non-magnetic wheels. It depends. If you're not using magnets, then it doesn't really matter. Since we've mentioned couplers, let's take a look at the type couplers we use. Now, on the end of the car, there's a little molded plastic box, which will be the coupler pocket. The couplers I use are KD magnetic type couplers. There are lots of different types that could be used. This is the one I happen to prefer. It comes as a three-part little set or kit. First is a spring, which will be used to center the coupler itself. Second is the coupler mechanism itself, and you just lay it right in. Then I use a little bit of this graphite material. It's a fine powder. It's basically a lubricant. You spray just a little bit of that in the coupler pocket.
That's
Very
almost,
fine mist.
Yeah, almost dry, isn't it?
Right, it is dry. And you take the top and carefully slide it into place, making sure you don't catch the spring or the coupler itself. Now, our coupler is installed. No real problem. We'll take our wheel set, put them on, take our screw, put it in, and have it mounted. Now we've got the wheels mounted and the coupler. We're ready to go almost. Let's check it with our little test setup. I've got a section of track. I put a little magnet in the center so I can test the couplers. And I put a little height gauge down on the end to make sure they're the proper height. When I roll the car down here, we find, uh-oh, our car's a little bit low. Well, your local hobby shop has the answer for that, too. They use insulating washers. These don't have to be insulated, obviously. You could use brass washers or other metal washers to adjust the height. The main thing is they're a known height. I can look at that gauge and tell you that it's about roughly 4 washers short.
But if everybody's building the cars the same, then you're not always going to need the same amount of washers, or is this just...
No, remember, they're mass-produced. All these cars are mass-produced, and so there gets to be a little bit of variation from car to car. Also, since I'm using couplers other than those that came with the car kit, I have to adjust for that. So I put a couple of those washers on, put it back up, let's set it on the track, and we'll retest it. And now we've got a perfect match. We test 2 things here. One is the height of the coupler itself, or the so-called knuckle. The other's little metal bar that hangs down are the air hose or glad hand. Okay? Now, we go back to our magnet, roll it over, and make sure that the coupler opens when we roll over that magnet. Everything looks pretty good with this car so far. The last thing we need to do is check the weight. I've got just a good old postage meter here to check the weights. The National Model Railroad Association recommends that you use 3.5 ounces for a basic car, and then add half an ounce for every additional 10 feet. Well, like everybody else, I modify things a little bit. On the Soo line, a 40-foot boxcar must weigh 4 ounces. So we check it, and this car checks out. If it weren't heavy enough, you could take some different types of weights, and here's some that are painted. Here's just a slug unpainted. Here's some loose lead weight that's quite moldable. Or you can just get good old linotype slugs, and I just take enough of those to set on here till I get the proper weight. You can always glue several of them together if you need to and put them inside the car. The main thing to remember is to keep the weight low in the car so that you have a low center of gravity. You put it up high and the car will start to wobble from side to side.
But that's what makes me think about one thing. When it starts to wobble, I mean, why don't I just add the extra weight just to hold it down then? What's the
Well, you can get too much weight in the car. You want to keep an even weight throughout the train. You don't want a lot of light cars up front and heavy cars in the back, so when you start off, it pulls the light cars off the track. The way to stop wobble is to take one of these screws and tighten it down as tight as you can feel snug, and then back it up about 1/4 of a turn. Then go down with the other one and leave it fairly loose. That'll let it roll through any sharp curves you might have, but keep it from tipping over to one side or the other. Okay, Chuck, now we have a car that we've checked the wheels, we've checked the couplers, we've checked the weights. This car ought to last you about 1 year in general service. Here on the Soo line, we bring them in about once a year, recheck everything, make sure that everything's still engaged, still meets the standards, and put them back in service.
Richard, I noticed that a lot of your cars are dull and grimy like they've been out on the road. Now, I've looked around in a lot of the hobby shops and toy stores, and I can't find them like that. How do you do it?
Let me show you right quick how we do a few of those weathering techniques. Let's move this out of the way. Puttered workbench is a sign of a simple man. Let's just take a standard car here, and I'll show you several different weathering techniques. The first technique would be to use oil-based paints, such as these, and an airbrush. I just picked a couple of colors out of my box: foundation, grime, mud, earth, any sort of thing like that. Okay, Chuck, all we do is I've diluted this down about half and half with a solvent, put it in my spray gun. Now let's think about where would a car, as it rolls along, where would the weathering naturally occur? The wheels would throw it up, so you might see a little bit of it come up on the ends of the cars. Use a very light spray. Lightly spray on the ends and around where the wheels are. That gives you the overall weathering effect. Now, you don't see it right yet. You'll have to let this dry. But you could take and put several different colors on there just like that. Now, that requires that you have an airbrush, and you have to have a place to do it. And if you don't have a air cylinder tank like I do, carbon dioxide tank, then you've got to have a compressor or something that makes noise and can create some problems. Let me show you two more little techniques I do that are very inexpensive and also very quiet. I have some children around the house, and they happen to have little watercolor sets. So we're just going to take a cup with some water in it, take a little bit of the brown, put it on, various degrees, take some yellow, maybe have a little bit of rust, different areas of the car. Once you kind of get that on, you feel pretty good about it. You can just take a good old finger and kind of streak it all down. Everything always runs downward in nature. Water will run off the car onto the sides. So you kind of smear it out a little bit like that and get an uneven pattern to it. Now see how it's starting to look weathered, aged. Okay, Chuck, if you're not happy with the results you have, just put a little bit of water on it and kind of rub it off.
You know, very easy to use. You've always got the materials around. Another way you can do that's real inexpensive, requires just a little bit of safety, is to just take some good old colored chalks and a single edge razor blade. What we're going to do is just scrape on our chalk, get a little bit of fine chalk dust down here. Again, using kind of yellows or browns. I'm going to take a little bit of that water and just brush them on. They make a little bit of a paint. Now, the other thing you can do, you take the light, add it in, put them around on the trucks. The trucks always get dirty. Now, the other thing you can do is just take your chalk and directly scrape on your car. Just kind of lay it over on its side, scrape a little bit along the bottoms, down on the wheels especially. That's where it gets the dirtiest. Got it on there, and just kind of brush it on again. You can take a little dry brush, run over it, move some of the effects in. So with a little bit of chalk and water, or just some watercolors, you can very effectively weather a car. Remember, just don't have anything that's regular or appears too obvious. Don't use bright colors, use the browns, use the very subdued colors with it. Or if you want to go the little more expensive route, use an airbrush, and you can use the oil-based paints and have very effective weather.
Next time on All About Trains, we're going to take a look at a more in-depth study of painting, detailing, and weathering. Join us.
If you have questions concerning your particular layout's applications, visit your local hobby shop. They'll be happy to answer your questions.
Come and let me tell you a story I know, all about trains and where they go, all about trains and what they do, all about trains.